Happy New Year, everybody. It is the final hour of a decade, and I'm gonna spend it in the captain's chair and discuss. I didn't really have anything special planned for the occasion. I just had an article from the perspective section in the local paper that they got from the New York Times, and it is entitled "The Tyranny of the 63 Million" by Michelle Goldberg. I was going to go through this, but I was just going to mention a couple of things real quick. One, and I'm a little loath to talk about this. Here, adjusting my microphone. I'm a little loath to talk about this, but Sargon of Akkad, who I follow on YouTube, just did a video recently that was a little spicy. It was a little bold of him to do it, but it was entitled "Left-Wing Jewish Outgroup Preference." And there's something that happens in the progressive mindset. I think most progressives are white people, whatever white means. And a lot of them are progressive Jewish people. And they seem to have this strange outgroup preference where they sort of tokenize other people's cultures when they talk about representation and stuff. I'm not going to ramble on about that. I will talk more about it when it becomes relevant as we go into this article. This is going to be a short one because we're just going to focus on this article here. So, "The Tyranny of the 63 Million" by Michelle Goldberg. When George W. Bush lost the popular vote to Al Gore in 2000, but became president anyway, he did so with almost 50.5 million votes. I didn't know that number until I looked it up, because it would have been unimaginable for that president, even though he could be quite demagogic, to brandish it as proof that he represented some quasi-mystical conception of, quote, the people, in contrast to nearly 51 citizens who voted for his opponent. Yeah, there's something in election where if you are voted by a certain majority, you can say, well, I have a mandate. And I don't know if that's exactly what's going on here with the 63 million, but we'll continue. Anyone who pays attention to politics, however, knows that Donald Trump got around 63 million votes in 2016. That number has taken on totemic significance for him and his supporters. Any attempts to restrain his power are seen as a sin against 63 million. During the long impeachment debate in the House on Wednesday, Representative Bill Johnson from Ohio called for a moment of silence to remember the voices of 63 million American voters whose will Democrats defy, as if seeing Trump held to constitutional standards was a sort of death. Yeah, constitutional standards, okay. On the surface, it seems strange, this constant trumpeting of a vote total that is more than 2 million less than the total received by Trump's opponent, Hillary Clinton. Trump didn't just lose the popular vote, he lost it by a greater margin than any successful presidential candidate in American history. It looks like more people voted in that election, though, so that might explain that. I don't know the numbers. The right's bombastic repetition of Trump's 63 million could just be a propaganda trick meant for bullying America's anti-Trump majority into seeing itself as marginal, despite more than 65 million votes Clinton received. But as I watched impeachment unfold, it seemed like something more than that, an assertion that of whom Republicans think this country belongs to. Yeah, so I feel like one of the reasons why you lost the last election was because you equate anybody who isn't progressive to be a white supremacist, and it seems like you're continuing to do so. And the accusations of Trump being a white supremacist, she goes on later in the article to talk about a bunch of old white people and how, you know, their party is so diverse. And it's interesting watching, Victor Davis Hanson gave commentary about this before, where he was talking about, like, on the debate stage, a bunch of people saying, like, well, look at all the old white people up here, and, like, what happened to the diverse voices? What happened to Kamala Harris? You know, and it's like, well, you know what? People want to vote for policies that they think will benefit them. they want to be able to make educated decisions, and they don't want to be held by a tyranny of quote-unquote representation. Because I feel like our democratic process is what represents us, not intersectionality. Intersectionality is a cult. It is not representation. So when you are challenging all of these institutions and, basically essentializing what people say, I'm going to go on a little rant here. I was making a point with a coworker earlier today, and I was talking about, isn't it strange when you look historically at different examples, you have, and we'll see how relevant this is, when you have a popular mandate for, when the majority of people in a country choose something that is terrible, you blame it on the dictator. But is the inverse true? I'm losing what's the point that I'm trying to make here? I feel like there's this kind of having your cake and eating it too type thing, where just saying, well, the majority of the people, the will of the majority of the people is what's best. But it's well, not necessarily so, and I think there's plenty of instances where you can say that that's wrong. But when it benefits you, you say, well, look, the majority of people want it. But when you want to make the opposite argument, you just kind of, flip it. So I don't know. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm gonna get to the point here. As far as identity and representation go, if you are essentializing a person, biological essentialism, that is some kind of cardinal sin when you want to represent yourself as an individual. But when you don't want to make an individual argument and you want to say, well, I am a part of a group of people that is oppressed, that goes right out the window, because then you immediately start to biologically essentialize yourself. So it's well, which is it? And it's well, it just depends on what kind of argument I want to make, because I don't have to be rhetorically or logically consistent, because it's all about power. Everything is power, power, power. So we'll continue. I don't know if that was really helpful or coherent, but we'll just go along. I'm just freestyling. I'm going to look at the view screen. Look at the view screen as we continue with this article. Hopefully the camera doesn't glitch. There we go. Over the last 3 years, a political narrative has developed that Republicans in Congress secretly dislike Trump, overlook his personal degeneracy in the interest of enacting an agenda. Wednesday should explode that fiction forever. So, no, so people can dislike the personality of somebody and the way he talks and the way he tweets, but also his policies and what he gets done. And they can separate those two and can decide that they don't want to impeach somebody because they just don't like them. Again, this might be far afield, but I'm just going to go out there and remember the Kavanaugh hearings, and when they were talking, I just remember people that I otherwise think are reasonable. I'm looking at Sam Harris in this situation. He had a commentary on it, and people were like, Sam, I feel like you're being unreasonable. And he's just but Trump is so far beyond the pale. And they're can you articulate exactly why, other than your feelings about him? Or, I'm just talking about Trump now, but Brett Kavanaugh. You look at Brett Kavanaugh, and he said, basically, the summary, all I could glean from it, because he said a lot of words, but he was just yeah, but I just don't like him because he's a Christian jock asshole. And I'm oh, so that's what this is about. And I feel like intersectionality allows you to do that. You don't have to look at things in a principled way. You can just project things at people based on their identity group and quote-unquote power dynamics. And I feel like that is just a huge step backwards culturally. So the Republican identification with Trump is total. Again and again, histrionic Republican congressmen equated hatred of the president with hatred of themselves and hatred of the sacred 63 million. They spoke of Trump with an awe and a maudlin devotion bordering on religious. Yeah, the contempt. Representative Barry Loudermilk, Georgia, declared that Trump had been given less due process than Jesus Christ himself. If Trump is a martyr, who are his persecutors? The media, progressives, outlets that lie and smear him. I made a video about one of those smears, and tell me that is not a smear. You could watch the debate with the sound off and understand. Yeah, here's where she thinks that she's making a good point, and I go, this is the divide, and I hope that we can bridge it, but goddamn, this is completely inexcusable. So, if Trump is a martyr, who are his persecutors? You could watch the debate with the sound off and understand. It doesn't matter what they're saying. That's what she's saying. All day, Republican speeches delivered by old white men. You can just turn the sound off and see old white men and just wave your hand and be like, well, it's white supremacy, because, you know, the words coming out of their mouth and the quality of those words doesn't matter. I just look at the person, and I'm going to call that progress. That has never made any sense to me. That is so backwards. Alternated with Democratic speeches, where we had token people from women, people of color, and young people. This is what I was talking about with my coworker. I said, so if you're a progressive person and you feel like you are in a party that is representing women, don't you feel condescended to when you listen to NPR and they say, well, why are these women voting against their interests when they vote for such and such and they choose such and such? And it's like, isn't that condescending and very anti-feminist and very like anti-empowering to say like, well, because you are women, you have to vote this way, and because you are black, you have to vote this way. And Kanye West is no longer black, and Candace Owens is no longer black. They receive all these smears. They are referred to as I don't know if I can say those words on YouTube, but that's what progressive people call them when they don't vote according to the interests that we have assigned to them. How is that progress? That seems so backwards and power-mongery and vulgar. And I don't understand why progressive women tolerate it. You're going to tell me who I'm supposed to vote for because I have a vagina? That's progress? What nonsense. Insufferable. From women, people of color, and, oh, she forgot to capitalize people of color, and young people. White men make up 90% of the Republican caucus and 30% of the Democratic one, and the day dramatized the representational gulf, because that's what represents us, not our character. I can't quote Martin Luther King anymore because that's a microaggression apparently. Like, you're not making arguments, rational arguments that try to persuade people. You just have a bunch of slurs. You can just mute. Like, I'm talking right now, and you can just be like, oh, he's a white guy. Hit the mute button. And it's like, isn't that the essence of racism and bias? Well, no, it's not, because power dynamics. It's just like, so how are you not a power cult? The cult of progress is a power-worshipping cult where the only thing that matters is power. Like, if you look at the principle of what's going on, you can just dispense with that because power dynamics in every situation. Is that not becoming more obvious? That's what these arguments are based on, and it's so vulgar. With the sound off, this is her again, with the sound off, you could hear fury and self-pity from the Republicans, along with, at times, outrage that Democrats would have the audacity to speak on behalf of American values. Yeah, it is kind of outrageous, because I don't think your brand of racism that you call progress, that you project at the rest of us, is an American value. I despise your cult, but I will uphold one of the American values, which is the freedom of speech, because I think you discredit yourself the more you write these disgusting articles. I'm not trying to silence you, but you're trying to silence anybody who doesn't toe the line, you power-mongering freaks. Absolutely ridiculous. All right, at the start of the minute, I'm all fired up. Yeah! All right, I'm going to go sit in my ready room. Sorry, everybody. Not sorry. They're like, yeah! Tell him, Captain, Governor. Okay, let's see over here. Look at my trophies. Oh, my trophies. Somebody took my trophies down. I gotta put them back up. Whew. Little intermission there. To continue. At the start of this administration, many who are horrified by Trump, me included, thought that at some point the Republican fever might break. It's not a Republican fever. Again, another act of projection. There was an election. You lost. This is kind of like similar to what happened in the UK with people that basically have progressive values out there. There was a popular vote referendum, and the people in the House, in the Parliament or whatever. I don't know if it's a great parallel, but it seems to be a parallel. Like, if you are progressive over there and progressive over here, You are defying essentially the constitutional will of the people. And here it was through an electoral college vote. There it was through a popular vote through the referendum. And the representatives, being elitist and snide, denied the will of the people in both circumstances and then projected that at the opposition. But who's in defiance of the rules of order? Like, if you had more substantive arguments, I would like to hear them. But basically saying, oh, well, I'm just going to put you on mute because you're white and because power dynamics, it's just like, that is insufficient, and I don't think anybody should accept that. So that seems to be all you got. So at some point, it's just like, well, why don't you just shut the hell up? Because it's not convincing people. It's turning people off. It's so unprincipled. And they're just running on fear. Like, well, he's this, and he's just like, he's the white supremacist, and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, how dare you? Like, I want to talk to people and just be like, I keep having to make these caveats, like, well, this isn't about defending Trump as a person. This is about defending particular principles. And they're just like, well, do you endorse Trump? And it's just like this ultimate taboo. It's just like, so what if I do? I'm supposed to be terrified to express my views, where you get to blare yours and call it yourself righteous? They seem so backwards to me. And if I ask you any questions, they just roll their eyes and go, you're one of those. I just hear a white person talking. It's just like, how is that not horrendously backwards? I can't, like, the content of my speech can just be dismissed. But here I am, and I am protecting yours. I insist on the protection of yours. If anybody went to Michelle Goldberg and said, wow, this is a terrible article, you shouldn't be able to write anymore, I would go, no, she should be able to write. She should be able to say, she should be able to discredit herself with her own words as much as she wants to. And they should be able to publish them. Sometimes I think it's like, I'll make an exception for that other article well, I guess it was an op-ed, so maybe there's different standards, but that other article where they were talking about Trump being racist, and where they clipped his speech, they clipped the context. Such an active projection. If you're interested, just refer to that later. I will continue with the article. At the start of the administration, many who are horrified at Trump, me included, thought that at some point the Republican fever might break. Projection, leading conservatives in Congress to check a dictator-worshipping buffoon. Projection, for the sake of the Constitution they claim to revere. Projection, you don't care about the First Amendment, you don't care about the Second Amendment, you care about your feelings and how institutions of power can serve them. Projection. I've become ashamed of my naivete in imagining any overlap between my ideas about this, what is valuable in this country, and theirs. Well, you know, if you were capable of having conversations with people and not just calling them racist constantly, maybe you wouldn't feel so naive. Or maybe you just might understand that you're the one that is... There's a lot of talk about the 63 million people who voted for Mr. Trump, the House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer said in his surprisingly moving speech on Wednesday, because that's what's important, emotional appeals. Little talk about the 65 million people who voted for Hillary Clinton. Not that Trump doesn't have his, man, I'm talking over this article so much, but Trump has his emotional appeals as well, and he gets criticized for a lot of that, and fairly so, but and this is another level here. With the House's impeachment vote, the America outside of Trump's ruling faction finally mattered. So yeah, the executive branch is one of three branches. I don't know if he is in the ruling faction, but he occupies the executive office. And there is a balance of powers. And yeah. I don't mean that impeachment was revenge on a minority president made possible only by brute majority in one chamber of Congress. Seems like that. Before the Ukraine scandal broke, I had harangued leading Democrats to impeach Trump for obstructing the Mueller investigation, excuse me. Obstructing the Mueller investigation, which was predicated from the Steele dossier. Are we going to examine that, or do you not have to talk about it because you hold the microphone for pretty much every media outlet except for Fox News? And if I try to talk about it on YouTube, people get demonetized, people get shut down. So it's like, sheesh. You never answered any questions about it, and then you're going after him for obstruction of justice. And it's like, well, didn't Hillary Clinton obstruct justice with that server thing? Well, she was pardoned by an unelected bureaucrat. It's like, oh, okay, democracy and constitutional values. What are you talking about? You're so full of shit. I had harangued leading Democrats to impeach Trump for obstructing the Mueller investigation for his flagrant violations of the Constitution's Emoluments Clause and for cheating in his 2016 election by committing campaign finance crimes. And I'd been repeatedly frustrated by their extreme reluctance. Democrats didn't want to impeach, but once they decided to, Trump's insistence that his Electoral College victory grants him impunity didn't work. Impunity. For one night, democracy asserted itself. Impunity. So, you know what? You guys voted to impeach and it went through. Why don't you submit that? Why don't you submit that to the Senate? Now you're playing another power game. And then you pretend to talk about principle, and then you project. Absolute nonsense. Much has been made of the fact that the articles of impeachment received no Republican votes. In the end, Trump's impeachment passed with more House votes than Bill Clinton's. Today, especially today, I reflect on the founding documents that have set us apart in the world, leading people across generations and across the world to risk everything because of their belief in our great nation, said Virginia Democrat Abigail Spanberger. Women and people of color, of course, were originally outside the protection of those founding documents. There's the intersectionality. But on Wednesday, vote for your interests, not as an American. We're going to talk about American values, but really what we're talking about is voting for my interest as a woman, as a person of color, as a coalition against the normative culture, as a coalition, as allies against white people. But we're going to pretend to not do that, and we're going to talk about American values. That's not an American value, by the way, politically organizing in such a vulgar fashion. I mean, you can do that, like... There's people that organize as La Raza, the people. They're not white people, and if white people did that, it would be a cardinal sin. But if other people do it, they're totally allowed to do it because, you know, power dynamics. Because that's the only thing that matters. But we're going to pretend to have values. What a farce. But on Wednesday, the most diverse Congress in history, because that's what matters, diversity, quote-unquote diversity, diversity with a capital D, declared that even the most powerful white man in the world should be bound by them. Yeah, you're not all racist or hateful, because power dynamics. When Republicans act as if that's a sacrilege, they show us what they worship. Yeah, so we're the ones worshiping our own race. Projection. We're the ones worshiping power. Projection. Absolute nonsense. So there's this thing... I'm going to tack it on because I'm just going balls to the walls on this one. Woo! I'm going to do a dive roll.